Hello. Figured I'd make a short video, hopefully. Just talking about books. Yeah, back in school now. And I got quite lucky. I'm taking a class on James Joyce, which they added late, and I was able to get into taking a class on Edmund Spenser, which I'm enjoying much less than I expected. And yeah, it's been pretty interesting so far, the Joyce class. Because we started chronologically, so we started with Dubliners, which, is super easy to read, like my friend read it, or said it, like, even a redneck could understand what's going on. But, which is true. So, some of the people in my class, like, they were just misreading things on purpose, trying to make characters lesbians and, trying to make it this and that. And, even a redneck could understand what's going on. But, so we read that, and, yeah, it was really nice rereading it. I forgot how much I enjoyed The Dead, especially the end paragraph that, yeah, I'm not sure if this is true, but I think the end paragraph is, in some sense, like a veiled reference to Hamlet when Ophelia has drowned and she's being buried, and Laertes jumps in the grave and says something like, "Pile your dust on the quick and the dead," or something like that. And of course the line in Dubliners is, the snow is falling over all the living and the dead. And yeah, I took that to be a pretty similar reference, especially with Michael Fury being dead and Gabriel maybe not wishing he was dead, but preferring to be dead in that moment, or dying through Michael Fury, which is the way I like to look at it. But yeah, so I enjoyed Dubliners, and rereading Portrait of the Artist now, and it's so funny that so many people in my class say they don't like Stephen, or they're glad he got bullied, or they think he whines too much, or, just kind of like weird opinions. Like, who thinks these things? They're missing the point, obviously, of the book. Not completely. I mean, part of it is to be like, oh, look how silly we all are when we're young. That's part of the book. But, these people in my class, some of them are taking it to be, wow, look at James Joyce's dumb opinions. Look at this, great writer. Oh, wow, look at his dumb opinions. That, they think that Portrait of the Artist is like a diary that he wrote in his early 30s, because people forget that, he published this book when he was, what, 30 something, and he finished writing it around then. So, at this point we've only read until chapter 2, which is when the main character is maybe like 15, 16, something like that, maybe a little younger, depending on how you look at it, I guess, but, or how you see it. But yeah, I'm encountering like unbelievable opinions on some of these things, and yeah, it's so weird seeing people who don't know anything about James Joyce trying to read him and trying to put it together, or people who say that A Portrait of the Artist is hard to read, and we're going to read all of Ulysses later in the semester, so these people are fucked. Now, at least the ones who think that it's difficult, because, yeah, Ulysses is definitely more difficult than A Portrait of the Artist, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily difficult, especially, like, all of it. But anyway, so yeah, that's been interesting. And then I've been going to my Finnegan's Wake group, which has been awesome. The Joyce Conference is in Mexico City this year, which I would love to go to, but just too much money, so can't do that. But yeah, I've also been getting back into Latin American literature. Not really back into, I'm always into it, but you know, I've been stacking all my books to the side of my bed so I can look at them as I fall asleep. And one of them is Roberto Bolaño, who's, you know, pretty good, pretty fun to read. And I recently got his book, it's a pretty neat book, Between Parentheses. It's a collection of his essays and other things like that. And this really funny one that got me to buy the book is called The Best Gang. And apparently he wrote this around January of 1999. If I had to hold up the most heavily guarded bank in Europe, and I could choose my partners in crime, I'd take a gang of 5 poets, no question about it. 5 real poets, Apollonian or Dionysian, but always real, ready to live and die like poets. No one in the world is as brave as a poet. No one in the world faces disaster with more dignity and understanding. They may seem weak, these readers of Guido Cavalcanti or Arno Daniel, these readers of the deserter Archilochus who picked his way across a field of bones, and they work in the void of the world, like astronauts marooned on dead-end planets, in deserts where there are no readers or publishers, just grammatical constructions or stupid songs sung not by men but by ghosts. In the guild of writers they're the greatest and least sought-after jewel. When some deluded kid decides, at 16 or 17, to be a poet, it's a guaranteed family tragedy. Gay Jew, half black, half Bolshevik, the Siberia of the poet's exile tends to bring shame on his family too. Readers of Baudelaire don't have it easy in high school, or with their schoolmates, much less with their teachers. But their fragility is deceptive. So is their humor and the fickleness of their declarations of love. Behind these shadowy fronts are probably the toughest people in the world, and definitely the bravest. Not for nothing are they descended from Orpheus, who set the stroke for the Argonauts and who descended into hell and came up again, less alive than before this feat, but still alive. If I had to hold up the most heavily fortified bank in America, I'd take a gang of poets. The attempt would probably end in disaster, but it would be beautiful. So that's just kind of like a nice, nice thing to read. And yeah, I've been having like fantasies of being a young poet in the like early 80s in Mexico City, sitting with my legs crossed outside of a cafe, in the really thick heat, and like reading some avant-garde experimental poet, maybe like Rodrigo Lira, who was a friend of Bolaño, and he was from Chile also. And this recently was translated, this Testimony of Circumstances, and it just came out. And on the front here it says, one of the great poets of the 20th century, Roberto Bolaño. Calling this guy one of the greatest. So, and I'll read part of one. It's called Grecia 907, 1975. Any moment now my patience will snap, and I'll scream long and hard for several hours. Previously, precautions are a must, I'll have electrified my balcony, locked the door. I forgot to install bars over the bathroom window, scattered my walls with the amulets made on Friday and Saturday nights, so the tanks break down hundreds of meters away and the Jocker Panther pilots lose control of their loops and crash straight into the soldiers' trucks, which will have crashed straight into the tanks, which will be stuck in the asphalt, that will begin to melt a few minutes after the scream I let out, when my patience snaps. Any moment now my patience will snap. My nightly jacking off, our daily joints won't be enough, and when the opiates, the antipsychotics, the strong or light tranquilizers, the bottles of wine, beer, pisco, or mineral water aren't enough, previously I'll have massaged my hair and beard. eyebrows, armpits, pubic hair. I'll have taken long baths and extensive showers, and when this all isn't enough, I'll let out a long and powerful scream. Then the windows of the Diego Portales building will burst into thousands of pieces. Babies, nuns, maidens, and the elderly will cry. Professors will have to cancel classes. Phones will dial wrong numbers, but it won't matter because the phone lines will be down. My scream will prevent anyone from hearing whatever people have to say calling from Mendoza, from Arica to San Vicente de Tagua or the Antipodes, asking what's happening. What's the strange buzz that seems to radiate from Santiago de Chile? And people walking along the Ahumada Street will have to run and take refuge in the metro caves. And kids singing on buses will sing louder than ever, maybe for the first time with joy upon seeing the windows shatter first. The cracks extending through the tin bodywork, the roofs collapsing on passengers without hurting anyone and allowing room to breathe. For my scream will clear the smog, or rather make it accumulate in public offices, where it will enter through the shattered windows, forcing all bureaucrats to decide either they asphyxiate or they leap into emptiness. Since elevators will get stuck, and the boxes of stairwells will act as soundboards, just like matchboxes, just like cigarette packs, just like desk drawers, just like coffins, waking those who have been buried by medical errors or malicious intentions, adding their voices to my scream, while dogs howl and the young flee to the mountains, unaware that my scream can burst a volcano in any one of them. Although the volcano will probably burst from the San Cristobal hill, igniting the statue of the Virgin and shooting her off like a rocket that will majestically disappear among the clouds, bewildering the guardian angels, who will be unemployed due to the catastrophes that are predicted, only partially, since they will be countless, for I should advise the effects of my scream will multiply once all the kooks start screaming, and I'll have accomplices supplied with abundance of cotton to plug their ears, and they'll trigger every fire alarm in the city, or at least most of them, while ice cream vendors and propane gas distributors compulsively bang their cylinders and cowbells, just like sacristans with the church bells and the hall monitors their school bells, believing the apocalypse that Ioannis hallucinated in Patmos had come, and also the spring week, because I forgot to mention this will all happen in spring, since the winter is extra cold and my throat is fucking killing me. So you can kind of see his style from that, and kind of like an exuberant, sort of breathless style, like reminds me a lot of Frank Stanford, actually, reading it again there. But yeah, I do enjoy it quite a lot, even though I do think he commits some indiscretions here and there, but I do enjoy it. And then another book of poems that I would be, lounging in the Mexico City heat, maybe in June, and reading, seductively, hoping people look at the spine, would be In the Moor Marrow by Oliviero Girondo, which is a book of poems published in 1956 by the Argentine poet who was really good friends with Jorge Luis Borges. And this book is one of those ones that's mentioned along with Trilce by Cesar Vallejo, because it has a lot of interesting puns and neologisms and really unexpected use of language. This one I like quite a lot. In Spanish it's alta noche, but in English it's high night. High night of burned vertices, of subsleep of riverbeds, of pre-absence of hurricane-force faces that transmigrate, of complexes of snow, of gray blood, of subterranean bursts of rats of invaded beyond fever, with its ailing animal comet tail of libido, its Angora satellite, and its branches of shadows, and its breath that travels over all the algaes of the pulse of the immobile, from another dark sand and another now in the bones, while the stones eat their mold of anesthesia, and the fingers are extinguished and flick off their ash, and from another fugitive shore and other coasts it flows back to another silence, to other hollow arteries, to another grayness. It flows back, and it makes cuttings of itself, its plaints. And, let's see. Yeah, his poems actually remind me a lot of E. Cummings too, along with Cesar Vallejo. And this one's another interesting one. Recent then, if the setting, the sub-slurping, the barter-bang burrow, the bitterly begotten, the spawning to the gills, if the herniated ego hollow, the co-gut spilling to zero, the catalogues of disgust, the a-beliefs, the finite family were less able, if they were ex-incapable barely of the vital scrapings, the belly full in chains, the pallid post-masticated, if the final sinister swallow of light, fog of affliction wasn't so capable. Ah, the green seeing, the seeing everything perhaps in free flutter the being, the pure being without leaves already, without either coasts or wild waves or against only its sphere only, recent, perhaps, recent then. But yeah, this whole book is like that, and I enjoy it very much. I was surprised because I had never really looked into this guy very much. I had known that he knew Borges back in the day, but I didn't even know this was translated, so I was really pleased to have found it when I did. And there's one other one that I want to read, and it's by a guy who knew Roberto Bolaño and is actually one of the characters in Savage Detective. And I may have read part of this before, but not this poem, but I've read part of this book. Poetry Comes Out of My Mouth by Mario Santiago Papasquiaro. And yeah, like I said, he's one of the characters in Savage Detectives. Not by name, but by character. This one is called William Shakespeare Arrives in Chilpancingo. William Shakespeare arrives in Chilpancingo, almost breaking his crown in a small plane accident. A Jehovah's Witness of the sleepwalking kind watches him on the sly. A federal security officer shoots at him and does not hit him. William Shakespeare arrives, as he likes it, his hips still hot and fragrant, his cranium invaded by flaming salamanders fit together like pillow of rock and moss. William Shakespeare gets lost in Chilpancingo, on the way from the cabaret to the gynecologist, traveling now on tiptoe, now kissing the jaw of his anti-Lecumberi. Gradual progress, his blood tunnel, his helicopter backbone, his most witch-like will, his caprice and flight, upon which he rides and lets out cries while fleeing. William Shakespeare, who seeded his flower bed with black smallpox in Chilpancingo, excursion on the Camino Real, intoxication that we now savor as classic. William Shakespeare playing chess in Chilpancingo. Yeah, and then another interesting thing is this guy titled one of his longer poems Advice from a Disciple of Marx to a Fanatic of Heidegger. And that is itself a reference to Roberto Bolaño's first book, which is titled, I think, like Dialogues of a Disciple of Morrison to a Fanatic of Joyce, which is written by Roberto Bolaño and Antoni Garcia Porta, who goes now by A.G. Porta. And this was published in 1984. And I just recently got it from the library because I want to see how it is. Because, yeah, they wrote it together, which is pretty neat. And I've been reading some of Savage Detectives in 2666. And one book that A.G. Porta wrote that is translated is The No World Concerto, which was recently put out by the Dalkey Archive. And, yeah, if you didn't know, A.G. Porta is the Joyce fanatic out of the book there. So, and then another author I've been looking into who is pretty neat from this time period is Salvador Elizondo, and this, which you won't be able to read because it'll look black, well, maybe you can see it with the light, is his Diarios, his diaries from 1945 to 1985. And he was a neat guy because he was born, I think, in 1932, maybe. I don't recall exactly, but yeah, I don't know. I think he was born in 1932, some in the mid-30s, and he went to America to go to a military school in the mid-40s during World War II. And so he learned English, and in, I think, around 1950, when he was 18 or 19, he read Ulysses by Joyce. I think it took him a couple months, but it basically became one of his favorite books. And it's so interesting hearing him write about it because he read it in English. And, you know, it's so fascinating to imagine what it would have been like reading Ulysses in English as a Mexican in 1950. You know, probably a lot of people even in English-speaking countries hadn't read Ulysses yet. It was probably getting quite big by that time. I mean, I know Random House was pushing it out quite a lot around the 40s. I know you can still get copies pretty cheap from then, but anyway. And then he wrote that he robbed his mom so that he could buy Finnegan's Wake. Like, he robbed his mom's purse so that he could buy Finnegan's Wake, and that was in like 1951, I think, or late 1950. And yeah, I think in the mid-50s he met Sergio Pitol, who Valerio Luiselli, when he was alive, called the greatest living Mexican writer. And he was really young at that point. I think he was in his early 20s too, in the mid-50s. But it's so interesting seeing them together. Just really young guys, and now they're both dead, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I know Sergio Pitol is, but anyway. But yeah, the most famous book by Elizondo is Farabuf, which was published in 1965. And yeah, it's an interesting book that I also got from the library just today, but I haven't read it at all, so I can't speak much about it. But yeah, it seems like a really neat one. A lot of I looked at Instagram, which is a pretty interesting thing you can do. You can just search books and find people who have read it, and like kind of look at what else they're interested in. And that's pretty neat. But so yeah, I was searching Salvador Elizondo, and yeah, it's a lot of interesting Mexican people are reading the book. But yeah, it's just kind of funny that you can do that nowadays. But yeah. And then I've still been trying to read this damn book, which is extremely difficult to read it in Spanish. Porque parece mentira, la verdad nunca se sabe. Because it seems like a lie, the truth will never be known. And it's not written in easy English. It's basically, yeah, it's, I mean, easy Spanish, obviously. It'd be hard to translate, too. But it's very expansive language, Baroque language. They compare Daniel Sada, like Joyce is to Beckett as Daniel Sada is to Juan Rulfo. So that means, that Joyce is like a maximalist, just goes crazy, uses all the language he can, all the words, 200,000 words, whatever, or 50,000 unique words, whatever. I can't remember what it was that's in Ulysses, but. And then if you compare it to Samuel Beckett, who almost writes as if he doesn't know English very well, very minimally, whatever. It's clear he knows English well. That wasn't the point, but anyway. And then you have Juan Rulfo, who's known for writing in a very simple Spanish. And I think that kind of comparison is interesting, where Joyce just completely blasted off and, good luck trying to match him. Well, you have something like Bottom's Dream, which I just, made a video on. But it's interesting that, Beckett, in some sense, must have recognized that he had no chance competing with Joyce in the same game. So he played a different game. And then you have Juan Rulfo, who writes a really thin book and publishes it in 1955, 3 years after Daniel Sada was born. 2 years, I think. Daniel Sada was born in the early 1950s, so anyway, he was a toddler whenever this came out. But I think in some sense, Daniel Sada didn't want to compete with Juan Rulfo, or, maybe wasn't inclined anyway, and, he wrote his large Baroque novel, loose Baroque. I recently came across that phrase, and it's, it's a very good phrase. But, yeah, if you're interested in Daniel Sada, there are 2 of his books published in English. And the one that I've been reading is Almost Never. And oddly enough, there is a recommendation by Roberto Bolaño on the front that says, "Of my generation, I most admire Daniel Sada, whose writing project seems to me the most daring." So if you like Roberto Bolaño and you think he has good taste, which he generally does, or if you've liked anything I talked about in this whole video, or if you like my videos, or if you like to read in general, I would recommend to check out Daniel Sada. And let's see, what else? Oh yeah, I guess I'll end with a short story by a Mexican writer, Juan Jose Arreola. And he wrote short stories that Borges really loved. Borges really loved this guy's short stories. And let's see, he was born in 1918, the same year as Juan Rulfo, and he was actually born in Jalisco, which are the same, I think they call them states, or they call them colonies or something like that, Colonia, but anyway, yeah, so one I really liked is called Insectiad. And an interesting thing is this book was published in the 1960s, the translation, and I actually have the translator signed my copy back in the day. But yeah, so the one I would like to read is called Insectiad, which is really neat. We belong to a sad insect species dominated by the supreme power of vigorous, bloodthirsty, terribly scarce females. For each of them there are 20 weak, sickly males. We live in constant flight. The females pursue us, while for security reasons we abandon all nourishment to their insatiable jaws. But the mating season changes the order of things. The females exude an irresistible aroma, and we, enervated, follow them to certain death. Behind each perfumed female trails a string of pleading males. The spectacle gets underway when the female perceives that there are enough candidates. One by one we leap on her. With a quick movement she parries the attack and tears the gallant to bits. While she is busy devouring him, another aspirant flings himself on her, and so on to the end. The union is consummated with the last survivor when the female, exhausted and relatively sated, scarcely has strength left to decapitate the male astride her, obsessed in his pleasure. She remains asleep a long time, triumphant on her battlefield of mortal spoils. Then she hangs from a nearby tree a thick cartridge of eggs. From it the mass of victims will again be born, with their unfailing complement of executioners. Dude, when I read that, from it the mass of victims will again be born, with their unfailing complement of executioners. Dude, that is fucking genius. You know, that is some next level shit. But, and then there's another funny one. Well, that one wasn't really funny, but it's just really impressive. Another one is that was written in 1951. This other one is 1952, A Reputation. And I'm just going to read part of this because it's a bit longer, but it is so brilliant. Courtesy is not my strong point, which must be a reference to Paul Valéry Monsieur Test. Stupidity is not my strong point, that he starts that book with. But when traveling, I try to hide this failing by reading or looking dejected. But today I automatically gave up my seat without realizing it to a standing woman who looked vaguely like an announcing angel. The lady benefited from that look, greeted my action with such effusive words that they attracted the attention of 2 or 3 passengers. Soon afterward the seat next to her became empty, and when she offered it to me with a light and significant gesture, her angelic face registered a beautiful look of relief. I sat down there hoping that the trip would continue without complication. But that day was mysteriously fatal for me. Another woman without the image of wings got on the bus. A good opportunity arrived for me to clarify the situation, but I didn't take advantage of it. Naturally, I could have remained seated, thus destroying the beginning of a false reputation. Nonetheless, being weak and feeling myself compromised now with my companion, I hastened to get up, offering my seat with a bow to the recent arrival. It seems that nobody had rendered her such homage in all her life. She went to extremes with her garbled words of gratitude. This time it wasn't just 2 or 3 people who approved of my courtesy with their smiles. At least half the passengers gazed at me as if saying, "Here is a gentleman." I thought about leaving the vehicle, but I immediately thought better of it, manfully resigning myself to the situation, nourishing the hope that things would go no further. And then it continues to